Okay, good evening everyone and welcome to the second meeting for the Essex Design Guidelines. Tonight we'll be doing a virtual tour of Essex and also going through some administrative items that we need to clarify. So welcome and thank you all for joining tonight. So the agenda for this evening is to first decide on the design review panel extent, and we will go over what the existing extent of that panel area is and have more of a discussion in just a second. We will then be doing a virtual tour of Essex, just going through some photos that we've taken over the last few weeks and some Google Earth imagery and also some drone imagery to try to give you all a general sense of existing conditions in Essex. We'll then be going through a brief discussion on the urban design features that we see through in the photos. And then we'll be just briefly going over the existing website, and we have a survey that we will be passing out at the end. So it's kind of a lot, but I think we can get through this pretty quickly. So we'll just get right into it with looking at the current map of the design review panel and figuring out what this committee wants to do in regards to that. Okay, so it's kind of difficult with this being on WebEx, but I think we're gonna just have an open discussion with this. So the current DRP area is just as you'll see on the left here, that's the current extent of the design review panel. And there was discussion in the last meeting on whether we wanted to keep that the same or whether we wanted to extend it down Back River Neck Road and then further east down more towards the Middle River. And it sounded like from that discussion that this group was leaning towards possibly wanting to expand that the existing DRP area. So we are just wanting to discuss that again, and if people have strong opinions either way, feel free to chime in and let us know.
Bill, if I could start off, I guess, some of the comments on that. I think there is tremendous benefit to expanding the boundaries of that DRP for the Essex area. I think that sort of the big thing when we're looking at revitalizing the commercial corridors of Essex, I think it's important to look at it not so much from just that isolated, here's the 400 and 500 block or 300 and 400 block of Eastern Avenue and what we should do there, but to sort of take that and do a much more cohesive and unified approach across that longer Eastern Boulevard corridor and that Back River Neck Road corridor so that we tie in all of the sort of commercial gateways in that area together, and there's all sort of a common design elements, common themes, and there's that consistency among everything there as well.
Thank you, Kevin.
Hi, this is Sandy Marenberg. Do all these areas have a common design element now, or are we going to try and create design elements that overlay different current designs, which makes it a lot harder to come up with a common theme? If you've got manufacturing and office and residential of different eras, it's harder to come up with a design criteria that fits them all.
Can you give us your definition of design?
Well, design covers a lot of things. I mean, single-family homes and office buildings don't necessarily, built in different eras, don't necessarily make it easy to come up with a common theme to judge them by. And if you have large plots of land with a single building on it versus density, you know, where you have urban density in a strip, again, different rules would apply normally in a design review panel scenario.
And go ahead.
This is just me, but I would say the entirety of every one of those strips is a mishmash of properties, both commercial and residential, that's been put in place over a period of 50 or 60 years. So I don't know if there's a common design element. I don't know if there's a common design element even within one of those areas, let alone all of them. And maybe Kevin, you can elaborate a little bit on that, if you know what I mean.
I guess to sort of piggyback off of what Robin has said, the areas that we're discussing and that we're really kind of looking at, it is sort of a hodgepodge of uncoordinated development that's occurred over the years. When you look at the part of Essex where that current DRP exists for, most of it is sort of your old school Main Street mom and pop shops with storefront windows. When you go further down the Eastern Boulevard corridor towards Sandy's property and what they're doing down with Blue Ocean, you get to tracts of land that are a little bit larger. You see a little bit more automotive use and gas station service shops. The tracts of land are a little bit larger. You see a little bit more residential in there. And the same thing sort of holds true to Back River Neck Road. I guess sort of the common denominator amongst all of that is that most of the things that you're seeing in those two areas, both the Eastern Boulevard corridor and the Back River Neck corridor, are that they are predominantly small family businesses, mom and pop shops, be it restaurants, retail, or automotive. Aside from those three, and then the occasional residence or apartments or something to that effect, that's primarily sort of what constitutes both of those two areas. The thing that's probably, I guess, much more differentiating depending on where you look in those two areas would be the density and some of your zoning setbacks and other things that exist. And it's just kind of based on site constraints as to which direction that you go in.
If we'd like to, we can return to this topic later after we go through some of the existing photos, if that would be better for people. And we can also return to it at another meeting. We don't have to decide right now, because it sounds like there may be some differences of opinion. But if we want to continue this discussion, we can. If anyone else has thoughts to chime in, please do so.
Hey, Joe, this is Matt, and I can just speak from experience point of view, having written a lot of design guidelines myself and having worked in places where I have to design projects that have design guidelines. I think it's okay that there is a variety of uses and a variety of building types and a variety of architecture. I think that I wouldn't be worried about coming up with a set of guidelines or criteria that work for everything. And it's not unusual to have criteria that might vary from among uses or locations slightly, and that might be the case here. So just from my perspective, this is not atypical at all to be dealing with the variety of considerations that everybody's talked about.
Thank you, Matt. Okay, so if there's nothing else for now, I think we'll return to this topic at the end of the meeting after we go through some photos of the Essex area.
Hey, Joe.
Yes.
I'm trying to get the screen, the pictures.
You can't see the screen?
No. Am I doing something wrong? I'm not that familiar with this.
Hey, Joe and Bob. It looks like Bob might be possibly accidentally screen sharing. So, Joe, I think you need to take back the screen share so we can see the
Should I hit stop video or?
If you see something that says stop screen sharing, it should be like near the top of your screen.
Yeah, there it is.
Yeah, I see that.
There you go.
There you are. Thank you.
No problem.
Are you seeing the presentation now?
Yeah.
I see everybody now.
Okay.
I see
It's,
John from.
Yeah, I have access to my presentation now, but it seems to have frozen on me. So, let's see. Great timing. Okay, there. All right. So in the last meeting, we briefly went over themes, and I think it would be good for us to consult these themes as we go through the pictures. So basically, I'll just go through them. What makes Essex unique? Are there facade improvements that would enhance the streetscape and walking experience? Are there specific focal points or nodes that we may want to pay specific attention to? Could there be a broader theme that any design guidelines can incorporate, such as water, recreation, or maritime activities? Would the committee like to retain the existing design review panel, or should it be expanded or modified? We can continue thinking about that as we go through this. And basically, overall, how does the Essex make you feel? Like, pretend that you're walking around in it, and this wasn't just a virtual tour. Okay, so we're going to start on the western side of Essex as you're coming over the Back River Neck Bridge, and we see the Cube, which we had a lively discussion earlier today with Sharon Keene and the Eastern Baltimore County Task Force, and we got into discussing the Cube. There are a lot of strong opinions, you know, on both sides of pro and anti the Cube. But I was lucky to visit it on a nice day and got a good picture of it there. So as we go further down, we see that there are some kind of mid to late century, 20th century commercial strips, and I don't have much experience with these businesses, but if we look at the current design, we notice that there are wide sidewalks in this area, which is nice for pedestrians. And actually, the road has just been resurfaced. That was about a week ago as I was taking these shots, and there are new sidewalks right along the curb. But the existing streetscape is rather expansive, which is pretty unique compared to a lot of other places in the county or in the country, for that matter. So that might be one advantage that we're looking at, because this is actually the case in a lot of Essex. So that might be something that we would try to think about, you know, how we could build on that advantage that we already have. As we go a little bit further down, we come to Fruitland, a very active business in Essex. Currently, they have a Christmas tree sale, and we'll notice that there's a lot of different types of signage around. So these design guidelines could note specific aspects of signage. signage that we'll get into a little bit later. So that's also something that we want to think about as we make these guidelines. So as we continue down Eastern Boulevard, we get to kind of the central area of Essex. We had these drone shots taken about 2 or 3 weeks ago, or actually about a month ago now. I see that there are still, yeah, it was about a month ago. And this gives kind of a better depiction of the travel way, the streetscape, with this is a state road, but there are definitely some unique features. As I mentioned, there are the sidewalks, there's the angled parking, which you don't see very often in many places. And, you know, also there are just a lot of cars going pretty quickly through the area. So it's a mix of people trying to get places quickly and also a decent walking experience. If anyone wants to comment on these pictures, if you have anything valuable to say, I'm sure it's valuable, more so than what I'm probably saying. Yeah. But feel free to chime in at any point.
If we could jump back to the last slide, yeah, just as a comment on that one more before that one.
Yeah.
Okay. So when I look at this one, particularly the two towards the bottom,
yes,
I guess the thing that draws my attention to those two and sort of looking at it with a little bit more of a critical eye is that it's very concrete heavy and it's very plain and sort of very empty. And I have to wonder if there's not a better way to dress that up and make that a little bit more aesthetically pleasing from both a pedestrian and a motorist standpoint, to make that a little bit more of a cohesive and welcoming business corridor, at least in that particular block. When I look at that, that's kind of the thing I noticed there that could have been done a little bit better.
And I'll chime in on these pictures as well, specifically referring to the cube, which I'm sure has spurred many discussions. As someone who was born and raised in Essex, I have been around it my entire life, and I believe, and Sharon can correct me here if I'm wrong, that at the last Essex Day, the Chesapeake Gateway Chamber, I think it was, did kind of like a poll on whether or not people liked the cube and if they wanted to see something different. Sharon, is that right? Am I remembering that correctly from over a year ago?
Yes, that's right, Gabby. We asked people at Essex Day whether they wanted to keep the cube, whether they wanted to see a sign put there, whether they wanted to see a sculpture of some kind, and whatnot. And we got quite a few votes on that. And so part of our CRAG funding for 2021 is to form a small group to evaluate what our options are and to make a decision as to what we will do there. Whether we're keeping it as it is, whether we're replacing, whether we're, doing something in between. So we will have a group that'll be taking a look at that, and we'll have representatives from all stakeholders.
Cool. Thank you, Sharon. Yeah, my only thought with that would be if that is to change, I think it would be nice to incorporate some homage or something referring back to that to kind of show like the history of Essex, because I know that has been around a long time and it is something that people remember, whether fondly or not as fondly.
Thank you.
Hey guys, this is Robin. I thought about this question a lot from the last meeting, and I think you'll see what I'm going to say in this picture and every other picture. And it's, I think people who live here, most of the people who've lived here their entire lives. They're very sentimental about the area. And they remember a time when like everything, your house, your school, your job, everything was close. And as you look through all these pictures, you'll notice like this strip just is totally transient. It looks like a state highway. There's very little parking. People, this little shopping center with the liquor store and the diner and the laundromat, I think people use that a lot. I'm talking. Hold on. But like our community association is like 900 people, and I can't find a person who's ever like shopped at that furniture store. A lot of the people who live here just don't shop here because there's just nothing here because it looks and feels like such a transient area. So I just wanted to throw that out there. And as you look at the pictures, keep that in mind, and maybe that can be formative as you think about design considerations.
Definitely. Maybe a way to try to limit that feeling of transiency, or creating more opportunities for leisure as just places to walk around and all that. So we're going to continue through this as quickly as we can. But you'll see that some of these buildings are pretty typical of what you'd see in a lot of other places. There are definitely some unique aspects of Essex as well, though. But this is one of the pictures of the not so unique areas.
When I guess two things that jump out when I see the photos that you have in front of us, just to sort of, if we're looking at things from a design standpoint and writing sort of guidelines and standards for things. One of the things that I think really takes away from commercial corridors and definitely discourages against that sort of welcoming atmosphere and less transiency, as Robin had covered, would be the roll top doors that you see in the left-hand picture. And then in the right-hand picture, sort of the overpowering amount of window decals. Having that overpowering amount of window decals and just sort of the brown paper doesn't really make for the most, what's the word I'm looking for? Friendly business district, I guess. It's sort of very busy in your face, and it looks more of sort of corner convenience store as opposed to restaurant I'd like to patronize or dry cleaners I'd like to patronize, if that kind of.
That's perfect. Thank you, Kevin. That's really helpful. Okay, so I think this may be right across the street, or within that same area, but it's a very different style, an older style. Do these photos elicit any strong feelings from anyone? And we'll see. Yeah, I believe it's this central block that we're still on.
The main thing that jumps out to me between those sets of photos is the difference between the newer construction in terms of style and the difference between the older construction in terms of style. They don't really have, from what I can tell, an element that kind of ties them in together to look really cohesive.
Mm-hmm.
I guess one of the other things that I noticed when I look at both of them, there's sort of a very worn element that they have stood the test of time. They're tired. They're exhausted from a building standpoint, particularly the photo with the U-Haul in front of it. The building, although I'm sure it has some architectural value, it doesn't really do it for me from an aesthetic standpoint. I just don't think that it really sort of cohesively fits with the storefronts and what's around it, particularly with the gigantic sort of storefront windows being placed on the second floor, but you can't really see anything or have benefit to them.
Yeah, hi, this is Sandy again. And these pictures are void of pedestrians. And to a great extent, cars parked and people shopping. Now, I understand we're in the middle of a pandemic and, that has a serious effect on it. But the pictures of these buildings are not unlike American small towns everywhere. And what appears to be lacking here is a match between what people who live in the area, the shops that they want to patronize. You know, some of the finer restaurants in the Baltimore metropolitan area and some rather ugly looking establishments. You know, you don't go to some of these restaurants because of what the outside looks like. You go because of the food and the warmth. Same thing with the local hardware store. You know, I've never seen a local hardware store look like anything else, you know, except it has lawnmowers out front and bags of, you know, sod and seed. But is the question here, and I know it was raised in our last call, just a lack of a match between the establishments themselves and what the locals are demanding in terms of services and shopping? And no matter what the building looked like, the match wouldn't be there.
Hey, Sandy, I can comment on that, and it touches on a lot of what Kevin had to say. Can we go back to the prior slide, please?
Thank you, Robin.
Okay, so La Villita is actually a newer restaurant. It is a Latino restaurant, I believe, by a Latino family. It's actually a really good restaurant. The venues beside that are, I believe, also Latino-run venues, and I think that's why you get the more splashier storefronts. And it kind of speaks, and I'll talk about this in the next slide. All of these properties, I believe, are owned by different people, and they have very different views about what they want to use this for. So if you go to the next slide, I don't know what the property on the right is. On the bottom left, there's kind of like that triple store venue. That is actually not a gun shop. The gentleman who owns that, he was involved in the Baltimore City Gun Trace Task Force drug distribution ring, and he got busted for that. That's the gun store is actually a false front. On the top left, that blue building, like bluish building, that's actually a packaged good liquor store. There's a lot of like drug activity between that building and the CVS. Behind that is a venue that hosts Alcoholics Anonymous. Hold on a sec. I think my bigger point is like a big part of the design problems we have is that we have disparate ownership of all these properties, and they have very different ideas about what to do with the properties. Some of them are like half rented out. Some of them are just squeezing the property for what they can get out of it. You know, someone might have a liquor license, and even though it's run down, it's profitable for them. You've got Kevin, what's the venue that like Eye Candy, which is another packaged good liquor store? Yeah, and we have a owner there that doesn't have the community in its interests, and neither does the business owner. So that's a common theme. Different ownership with different interests. Some of them aren't even actual stores. So just wanted to make that point. One of the other things, I think it's a lot of struggle. Both of the first portfolios, the Essex, goes back from that road. You have a mix of.
Kevin, your connection is breaking up a little bit. It's a little sketchy. Trying to hear you. It looks like you're frozen now.
Let me try another round.
Joe, can I pitch in on something?
Yes.
Because a couple things sort of hit me. Back in the day, we recognized that a lot of the storefronts, like the one on the right-hand side, you know, are like 50s, 60s vintage. And the idea was that the materials, if you go back and look at your 83 design guidelines, this building that you were just showing, or the new modern one, that was refaced just a couple of years ago. CVS was put in maybe 15 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
The newer buildings all came in under the design guidelines. So the very things we're criticizing may be unintended consequences of the design guidelines that are now in place. Because like the CVS went through a zoning hearing, they went through everything to design it. And when the UDAT panel came on 15 years ago, they said, that's a very pedestrian unfriendly place because it's set back from the road. You got to cross the parking lot. It's just not friendly. They were after the street frontage sort of things that we've got. But these pictures are all what you'd call have been there in place for 50 years or more. And the idea was, when we look at redoing these frontages, what are we going to end up with? We wanted 2 stories because we thought 2 stories gave a certain look to it. But we were looking also at replicating materials. So you've got a lot of masonry, you've got a lot of metal, you've got some wood. When you're looking at the houses, a lot of the houses in there are framed. So you really do have a mishmash. But the idea was to bring something cohesive to it. One of the things that's really intriguing to me as I've gone through this is we have a design review panel now. And almost everything that we have looked at that's been built in the last 30 years has gone through that design review panel. So the things that we're critiquing right at the moment, a lot of the things we're critiquing, especially in the newer centers, are the products of a design review panel that obviously we're trying to look at what they came up with and say, is this really what we want to do, or is there something else that we can put in place? To Robin's point, he's right. There's a mishmash of ownership. It's an intriguing combination, though, of people who have just come in the last 3 or 4 years and families that have owned these properties for many decades. And I find this to be sort of interesting because there has been reinvestment in this area of Essex the last few years. I find that to be encouraging. The older families, some of the older families that have held these properties, they're the ones that, for one reason or another, we have not seen the reinvestment. And that's one of the issues that I think we're going to have to grapple with when we get to the 400 and 500 block. What are we going to do about getting that reinvestment into those properties? But there's nothing the design review panel can do except to say, if you want something, this is how we're going to ask you to treat the frontage and how we're going to treat the property. So.
Thank you very much, John. That's great input. That brings up an interesting question about, whether the design review panel looked at those previous guidelines pretty strictly or leniently, or whether they just did not address in the guidelines what this current panel would have desired. And that's something we should continue to discuss as we go forward. So we'll be going through these a little bit faster. So this is the Karen Pines building. Yep, go ahead.
I just want to look at this one for a minute.
Yes.
I mean, this looks brighter and cheerier, but it's still empty and devoid of people. Now, yes. For those of you who live in this neighborhood and patronize, why this one has, conceivably a more modern, newer look. Why is it as void of cars and people as the ones that are looking mid-century?
There's nothing there.
One thing that also is void of businesses. The Times is now out of business, and I believe that at least section on the end is still made. Yeah. I think that there's lack of businesses there which are supported by the community.
It's still pretty difficult to hear you, Kevin.
I think one of the things he was saying is that a lot of the businesses that are in this photo are not there any longer.
Okay.
The bank is no longer there. The newspaper is no longer there, and you can see the whole other end there is for lease. So, it's devoid of cars and people because there's not much there.
Mm-hmm.
And this is one of the key blocks that we would like to see something nice happen with.
Well, Sharon, I guess my question is, if you set up standards for architectural design, nothing's going to happen until people want to show up and invest here. So how do we motivate people to come here and invest their money? They're only going to invest their money if there's going to be people who are going to use and buy their goods and services.
Hey, Sandy, if I can comment on that again? At the beginning of the call, I linked that University of Maryland Smart Growth study, and so it was a surprise to me. But what they told us was that we needed more housing in Essex to facilitate the economic growth. We needed several things. One of them being less office space. One of them being more housing, and I found that to be a surprise because everything around this commercial strip is housing. Like there's very few areas of Essex that are not housing. There's housing everywhere. And that's one of the things that they pointed out. Also, on that image you were just looking at, you got to keep in mind like that looks and feels like a state highway. Those cars are flying by there. What we need is to have a transportation redesign as called for, I believe, in this program, where we slow the traffic down through a combination of roundabouts and restructuring of the roadway. But like I remember, I would pull into this parking lot to stop by the East County Times to pick up a paper or whatever, and it's hard to back out because the cars are going by so fast.
And that's apparent from the picture. If people are going to be coming and parking here, they have to be able to back out easily without fear of damage to their cars or themselves. So yes, slowing down the traffic would be appropriate. Clearly, I guess what I'm wondering is there not a huge number of things that we need to be focusing on?
I'm sorry, can you say that last part again, please?
I'm just wondering if there's more things that we should be looking at to expand the shopping district, and not necessarily in terms of acreage, but in terms of use and in terms of storefronts that are functional.
Yeah, you'd really have to get a comprehensive view of really every property, I think. For example, if you look in the bottom part of this picture, it says New Life Sanctuary. This strip was actually up for sale, and there was a proposal. Someone wanted to build kind of like a mixed-use space with new fresh commercial space on the bottom and like higher-end rental properties on top, like really nice properties. But the owner has a contract with the person leasing that space for the church, and that was you can't sell a property where they have a guaranteed lease for a church. So that's the story of this piece of property, to my knowledge, and that kind of thing, it's block by block here. So I agree with you, but each block offers its own challenges.
Well, that gets us back to some sort of a master plan.
And we do have the master plan coming up. We'll be starting outreach for that in January. And at that time, that's when the community and the Department of Planning could look at larger use issues and zoning issues. That's why I put up that map to kind of show
has joined the meeting.
How the zoning, the light brown area is all DR55, so that's all residential zoning. So it is a commercial strip that's surrounded by housing. So, these issues will be they will be coming up in discussions in the county coming up. So that's something that we could also have in the back of our minds as we are discussing these guidelines. I'm going to quickly go through these. I just want to show you all the different kind of the different buildings that, or the different styles that exist now. I love the Christmas decorations in here. Sharon, I think you were probably a part of that, maybe. And so as we work our way further down, there are a lot of homes that have been converted into office buildings. That's a very standard type of building that we see. And then once we make our way all the way down to the end of the current design review panel area, we hit the Middlesex shopping center, which is, just a standard shopping center in many ways. Are there strong feelings about the current architecture of the Middlesex shopping center, or how it incorporates urban design features?
I think the problems with the shopping center don't have anything to do with the architecture, and I'll just leave it at that.
I would have to agree with Robin.
So are there things that, we're getting some feedback here.
It's blight-related issues. There's a homeless population at the library. There's a homeless population throughout the shopping center. The church behind the shopping center has in the past housed some of these folks. There's another church that feeds them on the property of the shopping center. There's a lot of drug use. There's frequently people with addiction problems at each business. I used to get my hair cut in the barber in the shopping center. They're now going out of business. So it's more of the community blight kind of issues here.
Are there design features in the current layout of the shopping center that detract from its desirability for anyone in this group?
It probably could be better. It's not the most appealing shopping center, even though it is fairly heavily used.
Shopping center design mimics more of what the newer development in the area does look like. So there could be some additions made to make it possibly more similar to that newer development to kind of tie both ends of Eastern Avenue together, possibly.
Yeah, if you go down, what's the new shopping center down the street? Is it Weiss that took over the Mars? Is that it?
That's the Waterview town.
Yeah, that's a Weiss.
Yeah. I see now. That's a lot more appealing. There's actually grass, trees. It's a lot greener when it's warmer out. This is much more appealing to me, and I think people would probably appreciate this a lot more.
If I could chime in just for a second, I think the thing that sort of
great. That's the type of conversation we're looking for here. So
the thing that drives this. So we recently had the same thing happen with Country Ridge. And Country Ridge Shopping Center went under new ownership. It suffered similar to how Middlesex does from an aesthetics problem. And once that new ownership recently took over, they repainted, they put up new siding, they tackled some of the old signage that was on the buildings, they redid the parking lot, they added landscape islands, new lighting, things of that nature, and it did a total 180 for that shopping center. So I think a lot of it is just ownership and less design.
Okay, I think we got all of that despite the feedback. So this shopping center, the Waterview Town Center, is actually outside of the commercial revitalization district. But I wanted to put it in here anyway, just to provide that contrast that Gabby had alluded to. So there really is, it is quite a contrast if you go between those two shopping centers. We'll go down to the last shopping center that is within the commercial revitalization district, the Hawthorne Shopping Center, which has its own unique style as well.
Yeah, just speak very briefly on the Hawthorne Shopping Center. And you can see it some of these pictures, and I know just from being in the area that there's lots of just like red, I want to say it's metal and painting that's down in that shopping center that really differentiates the look of it from the rest of the shopping centers in the area. It doesn't really, to me at least, look like any of the other shopping centers that are around.
Okay. Does anyone else have any critiques or praise for this shopping center? Okay, we're going to move down to the Essex Back River Neck Road area because that is part of the area that this group may end up extending the design review panel to include. I only have a few pictures of the area, but this is from the Country Ridge Shopping Center, as you can see. Also very different shopping center design, as was mentioned. But there's some pretty unique buildings here. Kevin, if your audio is working a little bit better, if you'd like to discuss this area, feel free.
I also have my speakerphone on, so can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
All right, let me mute on here so that I don't have obnoxious feedback on the laptop as I'm doing this. So with regards to Back River Neck Road, I guess the pictures that you guys have of Country Ridge has been renovated since then, so I would say they're not the most current. But I guess Back River Neck Road, it's more indicative of the stretch of Eastern Boulevard that goes from probably this, I guess, trying to think of, probably about where the Wachovia Bank used to be, or Wells Fargo Bank, down to the Middle River Bridge, with larger tracts of land, businesses that have parking lots, things of that nature, more land to play with. Most of it is either restaurant or automotive or shopping center. Those are sort of the three main property uses along that Back River Neck Road corridor. There has been some improvement and some investment in sprucing up that corridor. The big sort of gold standard with regards to Back River Neck Road, everyone always looks at Pizza John's. It's a rather odd architectural style for that area with that sort of Italianate design, but it really is the gold standard. It's beautiful, and that's sort of, I guess, one of the things that the community has been looking at when we review zoning applications, variances, and any kind of opportunity that we have for community input along that corridor. It has been the big thing that we've really been championing is adding landscape. Since there is more land to play with, there is more, as opposed to the Eastern Boulevard corridor, and particularly that main sort of Essex 3 and 400 block in there, the Back River Neck Road corridor is much more motorist friendly as opposed to being pedestrian friendly. So when looking at design and when looking at things like that, I guess there's more of an eye and an intention geared towards the motorist as opposed to the pedestrian, since that's sort of the primary mode of transportation and getting to and from those properties.
Okay, thank you very much, Kevin. And yeah, that photo is from Google Earth, so it's from a couple of years ago. I wasn't able to get down to the shopping center to take a picture of it, but I'm glad you mentioned that. So let's now go through some of the common architectural features and urban design characteristics that we've already alluded to in this conversation. So we're going to get into signage right now, and most of these signs are back on Eastern Boulevard. This is just a random collection of signs that I found. So there's a good variety in here. I don't know if I'm not sure how much say the design review panel has in signage. Someone can chime in if they know the answer, but I know that is something that they can address.
Is that something that's on the table, or would we have to essentially go to those private businesses and say, hey, would you like to buy into a sign design?
I don't know the answer to that. I think if we had specific standards within the guidelines, then it would be something that they would address in any updates to their property. So if we look at the other shopping centers, the Hawthorne and the Country Ridge, I'm guessing this Country Ridge shopping center has a new sign now too.
It's the same sign, but slightly less obnoxious looking.
Okay. Yeah, so there's, as we can see, not much consistency between those shopping center signs. Another thing that's pretty common along the corridor are large billboards. I'm not sure if I don't know if these design guidelines would cover these, or if they could.
So I guess a question, and it's probably geared more towards John and Mr. Bob, and they may know the answer to this, which is why I'm directing the question towards the two of them. But are there certain zoning classifications that permit billboards, or is that more of a special exception? Or because I noticed they're geared more towards certain properties and certain areas, you don't see them everywhere.
I have that written here. It looks like outdoor advertising signs are allowed in BL, BM, BR, ML, and MH zones. So those are the higher intensity zones, and they can be 25 feet tall to 300 and 300 square feet. So it's pretty lenient. Much of the area along Eastern Boulevard is BL or BR. So these signs are permitted there. I don't know if we've addressed things like this in other design review panel areas. I'd be curious about that.
Well, the design review in the 1983 design guidelines did address signs. I think it's page 16. I was just looking at them in very generic terms. Didn't really get into, just said this is what a good sign is. And you can see pretty much how it's been interpreted over the last, 40 years as to what a good sign is. But it does get into signage. These billboard signs, they're a totally different animal. One of the issues we've got was it's not only where they're permitted, but you can't just get rid of them because of grandfathering and things like that. So if you were to zone them out of existence, let's say, the county did this a few years ago, now to me a few years ago, about 30 years ago, they put in new signage regulations which called for a sunset provision. And the sunset provision had to be like 15 years down the road so that you weren't taking away property. And that's the kind of thing you'd be getting into with these billboard signs. Unless, of course, they've come in and gotten special variances and things like that. But even if you were to do away with them today, that's the kind of thing that you're going to get into is this grandfathering, where these signs can stay there even if they're not, quote, permitted anymore for at least a certain period of time. because they become non-conforming. The issue is one of when you ask for something, the county usually asks for something back. And what, to me, these design guidelines are supposed to do to sort of say, okay, county, here are the kinds of things you should ask back when you're coming in to build a Rite Aid, let's say, or you're coming in to redo Bill's Terrace Inn. This is the kind of thing that you're basically looking at trying to come up with to try and change the facade, but the look of the street. And I think it can be addressed. It should be addressed in any design guidelines.
Thank you very much, John.
Hey, this is Matt. You asked a question earlier about design review panel reviewing signs, and yes, we do. And to John's point, when we're reviewing any guidelines and signage guidelines as well, it's to look at, are they conforming? Is what the proposer is suggesting, is it conforming with the guidelines? And the guidelines are very generic. It's kind of hard to say they don't. If they're not specific in terms of look or material or size or anything, then you can't really say it doesn't conform. So I think if there's going to be, freestanding, pylon or monument signs, they should be addressed in design guidelines. Otherwise, you're not going to, you're going to continue to get a mishmash. And I think that goes for all the other signage types as well. There's going to be building mounted signs. There's going to be signs in the landscape. There's going to be storefront signs. There's going to be, and all of them should probably be addressed. But that's up to this committee. My point was, yes, they are typically part of the design review panel if they are addressed in the guidelines that we are looking at.
Thank you, Matt. Okay, we'll move on to awnings now. I just picked a random assortment of awnings that I found. Some of these are from Google Earth, others I took. So some of them might be outdated. I don't know if the Al Seafood is actually an awning. That may be a canopy. We can discuss anything you want about awnings.
Just chiming in, me personally, I'm a fan of the awnings. I think it helps add a little bit of dimension to those buildings, particularly in that much more dense part of Eastern Boulevard. When you're into that sort of the old school Main Street in that 300 and 400 block of Eastern Boulevard, it helps since you don't really have the ability to do landscaping or anything in that area. Having those awnings, it gives you an ability to add some character and uniqueness to your building and also use that for advertising and potentially in lieu of a sign that would otherwise be a little bit more obtrusive to your building.
Great, thank you. Oh, sorry about that. Okay, we'll move on to materials. As we've seen through this slideshow, there are, many different types of materials used throughout the commercial revitalization district in Essex, both in the main Eastern Boulevard corridor and then as we work our way east and then south along Back River Neck Road. So trying to pinpoint materials is not an easy task, but I'm sure this group has preferences for some. I've just picked out a collection here. We see that variety in the newer buildings here along that we looked at earlier with the stucco siding and some of the stone siding.
Joe, could I chime in for a second? So when can you go back to the slides, just not this one, the next one. So when I look at this particular slide, I guess the thing that when we're talking about, and I believe it looks like it's more of a masonry front, but the building, the gray building to the left, and then the building with the double doors and the green stripe. I guess my thought with those from a design aspect is that they are very masonry heavy. So there's not a lot of other design elements that help to make those buildings pop, and it looks more or less just sort of a blank wall. So if there's an ability when we're drafting these guidelines to have ways, and I'm not exactly sure of what the correct way to word it would be, but to sort of prevent just sort of giant blank flat walls like that. I don't know if there's the ability to add some stone or some shutters but something to kind of give those buildings a little bit more dimension than just that totally flat, the stucco like that.
Hey, this is Matt again. I think you make a great point. It's the materials are important, but also the composition of the materials and the elements on the facade. If you look at the two buildings that you mentioned, the windows and the doors just look completely haphazard. There's no symmetry or rhythm to them whatsoever. If there was, if they were spaced more appropriately, or there was a symmetry to them, or the tops of the windows sort of, lined up, they jump all over the place. That's important. And then when you start adding things like you said, shutters or awnings or something like that, that starts adding, some texture and some color and some personality to it. So I think it is important that the guidelines address, the composition of those materials and the elements. And to your question was, yes, the guidelines can address that. They don't have to be overly prescriptive. You don't have to tell the architect or the developer how to design the building. You just say, the windows and the doors and the massing should have some rhythm to it, or symmetry, or some proportion, and any awnings that you add should be purposeful, and at least that gives the design review panel some language that allows them to look at and say it doesn't conform because the windows and the doors are all haphazard. There isn't a rhythm to them, or the placement of awnings aren't purposeful, or whatever. So there's a way to write them where they're not overly prescriptive, but enough that describes the intent and gives the design review panel some something to sort of base their comments on.
Matt, you said that absolutely perfectly and much more eloquently than I ever could, but I agree wholeheartedly.
Yeah, and if I could jump in here, I don't know, this isn't a materials matter necessarily, but I know on one of your previous pictures, Joe, and I'm not going to ask you to go find it because I don't remember where it was, we had the purple wall with the Matty Bow guy on it. I don't know if there's an opportunity for more things like that, like murals, or if that would be to steal a word from Robin, flashy in breaking up the storefront. But I don't know if that's something that could be considered by the DRP or in these guidelines.
This is Matt again. I agree with you. I think that's something that is unique about Essex. You have this sort of, you have the Pizza John statue, and you have some murals here and there. Add some uniqueness and personality. It can be addressed in the guidelines. It's not easy because those things are very subjective, but it's not unusual for design guidelines to have examples. Here's a half a dozen examples of really well done murals. And there's at least something for then the design review panel to compare what's being proposed, know what you're proposing. Is it in keeping with these examples? It's too many colors, it's too glitchy, it's too, whatever one might say. So I would say yes, there could be a way to address what you suggested.
Thank you all. This input is great. Okay, let's move on to streetscape since we're now past 7 o'clock. We've already kind of gone over this. These are kind of what I consider to be the very, I really like these signs. I think they add a lot to the character of the area. Just pretty to look at. Thanks to Sharon Keene for that. And we also have these nice benches. So, there's so much space in the sidewalks here that there's a lot of potential in the streetscape if that's something that we ended up addressing with the design guidelines.
So one thing I was going to add here, and it was mentioned, a while ago by a number of people, when the sidewalks are as wide as they are here, there's plenty of room to put in some landscaping, to green this up, put in trees, and that's a relatively common thing for design guidelines to address. In some cases, it may be too narrow to do that, but
you've got to be careful. We put in trees years ago, and the owners promptly made sure they didn't last. The issue is the tenants, because they block the view of their signs and of their buildings.
Right.
So one of the issues that you're dealing with here is the pushback you get from the different interests, like the tenants who want to make sure that their property is viewed. Almost all of these places are destinations. They're not places that you would, just sort of on a whim go to. So they feel that they have to advertise so that people can find them as they highball it down Eastern Boulevard.
Hey, John, and if I'm not mistaken, we recently just took the rest of them down. Isn't that true?
Yeah, because a lot of them were just dead. And, that's an issue that you have to sort of factor into this when we look at the landscaping. And that's why I think that, one of the things that they were trying to do with the committee is to come up with solutions that wouldn't immediately garner dislike from the owners. I mean, it got into, maintenance of the trash. Everything was something that we had to really sort of take into account so that they would last.
Hey, John, do you know who the owners were that were complaining? Because I almost want to challenge this kind of notion, because my bigger concern is you go storefront by storefront, and if you don't kind of have something that ties it all together, like a comprehensive streetscape, and to be honest, 90% of people who are coming to shop in an area like trees. All the new modern redesigns of commercial space have trees. Like, who is complaining about the trees? You're muted still.
Yeah, I guess Sharon could give you to go over some of the issues as to where we had to remove the trees, sort of give you a clue as to where they were not thriving. But it's not an uncommon complaint that you have a couple of problems with trees. One is, you got to be careful what trees you plant so they don't uproot the sidewalk. You then have issues of the trees blocking the view of the signs and of the building fronts and things like that. And it's one of those issues, I think, Robin, that it's not alone to Essex.
And I get that, but if you look at the Baltimore County Master Plan for Essex, I believe there are trees. I believe when they call for the restricting of the road, there are at least trees in the middle of the road, and I believe there are some on the sides as well.
Well, the UDAT plan came up with trees. If I go back to the UDAT plan of 15 years ago, there was a whole restructuring of Eastern Boulevard and a lot of landscaping. So, yes, you can put in things, but the first question I would ask is who's going to maintain it? And how is it going to be maintained so that it keeps up? Because if it's not maintained, it looks like crud in a few months.
If I could just add a little bit to this. The trees that were what John is talking about, and I'm sure he may not remember back that far, but when they put the trees in, you had people coming out with chainsaws and just cutting them off because they were blocking their signage. So I couldn't tell you who it was that was well before my time, but the issues we had with the most recent trees were what John was talking about with the roots uprooting the sidewalk and becoming a tripping hazard for people, and the breaks being uneven and the trees being dead and all that kind of thing, which was a problem with a lot of them. In relation to going forward, it's something that the state does like to finance, and we would like to have the trees back down there. One of the questions we've been wrestling with is, do you select something? They like to see you pick like one tree or one type of tree and have it repeat down the street. So we wrestle with the idea of, do you get something that's short and flowering? Do you get something that's tall that eventually will provide shade, which is what they like to see? They like to see shade trees in the area. And so we have currently a grant for 10 trees for this downtown area, and we have asked for a grant for 10 additional trees. And so we have some money to do that. We're hoping to get to do that in the spring. But one of the other things that we're facing is that they are redoing the water main along Eastern Boulevard. And it ripped, where they started by the Back River Bridge there was a lot of ripping up of sidewalk and all that kind of thing. So you don't want to plant anything where it could potentially be ripped up when this project goes through. The timeline for that was supposed to be 2021. I understand from the state's point of view that has now been pushed back. So I'm not sure exactly when that'll happen, but for the time being, we're talking about putting trees in pots so that they can be moved if we get complaints by the store owners, but more importantly, so that they can be moved if they need to be for this construction.
I have to wonder if there's a sort of compromising middle ground to sort of achieve both goals that we set out to do. So my thought with that would be, is there a way to, when writing these guidelines, have them incorporate, hey, when you're doing facades, if you're starting from the ground up or if you're renovating, is there a way to incorporate planter boxes, flower pots, planters out front, to incorporate some sort of hanging baskets on the facade of the building, or cutouts in your front of the facade to sort of build planter boxes or spaces to plant small flowers or annuals or shrubbery or things of that nature that can be sort of something that helps give a restaurant or a small business a little bit of color and character and personality, but isn't so overpowering that it would block signage, obstruct views, lift up sidewalks, and sort of that in that direction.
I think that's a really interesting idea, Kevin, and I think if that's something you were interested in looking at, there's some cool examples up in the downtown kind of Towson area of the concrete planter boxes, and some of those have even been painted, I want to say by a local artist, because I saw him out there one day painting.
We have Deirdre on the line, I think.
Yeah.
I believe she's here, so yes.
Deirdre, do you want to answer that about what you've got going on in Towson there?
Hi. So in Towson, I got a bunch of local artists together to paint the flower boxes and just give a little uplift for foot traffic, and just an overall just a lift for the facades outside, because the flower boxes were getting graffiti and the flowers were being pulled out. So we wanted to get the community a little involved. So I've got local students as well painting the boxes, and just give a little bit of a better community feel is what we're doing with the flower boxes in Towson. And we've had a really good turnout. Businesses started to donate for boxes and work with the local artists, and it became a really big community thing. So right now we're not doing any painting because it's cold, but we're going to start up again in the spring. And I'm also getting Towson University involved, and it's been a really great, positive project.
Thank you, Deirdre.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Yeah, we have put quite a few planters there, and there are flower boxes that have been there. So over the last couple of years, we have put there's been some real nice color added with the flower boxes and the round flower pots, the planters as well. So it would be nice to be able to expand that to some of the areas that Joe showed us in the beginning that didn't have any of them, but we have started with that and have quite a few in place.
Yeah. I think the big thing is just getting the community excited about the development and new projects. And, once everybody starts getting involved, then the negativity and the worry about storefronts, and the positivity that comes with the upgrades, I think you'll see people starting to jump on board with your expansion that you guys are doing here.
And I will say the UDAC study has so much great work in it that we can turn to in the writing of these design guidelines. I think the overall economic conditions after that study weren't the best, and things are gradually turning around in this part of the county. So future development may be more likely to utilize whatever guidelines we come up with, and that's the hope at least. We'll move on to. We've already gone over this a little bit, but the UDAT mentioned specific nodes to focus, and we might want to consider whether or not there would be any differences between these areas and whatever design guidelines we come up with, or whether they would be, pretty much the same throughout the corridor.
So, Joe, just to ask a question to that effect, is there a way to, when we're drafting the guidelines, have sort of the overall guidelines for the areas that we're discussing, and then certain more area or node specific or center specific guidelines? So, for example, guidelines that maybe would be geared more specifically towards that very dense part of the Eastern Boulevard commercial corridor, and then more specific guidelines that are geared towards those properties further down Eastern Boulevard that have a little bit more land to them and some room to develop more of a standalone place, along with things on Back River Neck Road.
Hey, Joe, I don't know what you mean, and I think this is an important point that we're looking at here, but I don't know what you mean when you say something different here. And these are some of the central points of the corridor.
So in the UDAT study, so this just provides a couple of examples. They make very tailored prescriptive recommendations so this one, the one on the left, is for the Country Ridge Shopping Center. They're not design guidelines, but they're ideas for what future development could look like. I don't know how specific we can get within these guidelines. I think that's a discussion that we're going to need to have going forward, whether or not we would want to parse out specific design aspects for one area over another. I'm not sure if we would want to do that or not. I just wanted to bring up this topic to discuss.
Yeah, I think it's a great idea when you talk about something like thinking about these intersections. People have brought up instead of having intersections at certain places, having like roundabouts potentially. I think that works in some places and not others. I think what you're looking at now, every bit of traffic along this stretch of road needs to be completely slowed down. I think some people would really not like that. Some people that I'm very close to. But if you're ever going to achieve redevelopment here, Eastern Avenue cannot be a highway. So I think specifically this whole stretch of road just needs to be totally redesigned, not only to lower the speed of the traffic, to get people to not traverse Eastern Avenue to get to the rest of Eastern Baltimore County, but also if we want to do multimodal traffic, if we want to have things that are walkable, this is part of what needs to happen. It's like this needs to be redesigned. Does that mean roundabouts? Does that mean something else? That would maybe be for a bigger conversation, but I think that's part of it. When you talk about like the Country Ridge Shopping Center, you flashed up a picture there. Is that like a redevelopment, like redesign it and then build some homes? Is that what I'm looking at here?
This was more of a kind of envisioning process of what that area could be like under an ideal kind of future scenario. It's not a specific development or anything.
Yeah, and I probably want to hear what Kevin had to say about this first, but I think like something of that magnitude, like a real redesign. I had a really close friend back down that area when I was young, and I spent a fair amount of time down there. And I don't see many people using that shopping center at all anymore. Kevin can chime in here, but
I think not to cut you off, Robin, I think the question that Joe kind of wants us to grapple with, and I think what we're looking at with looking at those nodes and looking at places like Country Ridge and Back River Neck Road is that fundamentally the area that we're looking to cover with the design guidelines, there are certain sections of that area that are fundamentally different from other sections of that same coverage area. And I don't know that a strict one-size-fits-all approach is going to be the best way to do it. Similar to what Robin said, you have Eastern Boulevard, that's a much more walkable, pedestrian-friendly area. So when you're doing guidelines for that, you want to gear your guidelines more towards creating a more pedestrian-friendly, walkable, visually appealing experience, if you will, and properties that will deliver that, as opposed to when you are drafting and putting together guidelines for a corridor like Back River Neck Road, and you're dealing with gigantic properties that are well over 10 acres in size, like Country Ridge Shopping Center, or the Middlesex Shopping Center, or properties like that. So I think that when we're looking at drafting these guidelines, I don't know that it's necessarily a one-size-fits-all approach. I think that maybe the approach that we should do is, are there standard guidelines that could fall under a one-size-fits-all approach, and then are there other guidelines that maybe we sort of split the book, if you will, and say, okay, properties that fall into this portion of the commercial corridor should follow these guidelines. Properties that fall or in all these other areas should adhere to these guidelines, because each section of that corridor has different strengths, weaknesses, they face different challenges, and they have different constraints that come along with the properties within each of those sections of the corridor.
Thank you, Kevin. I think that lays it out really well. We're going to go ahead and try to wrap this meeting up. So for the next meetings, we need to schedule that. So tentatively, we are thinking for January 12th or January 19th, if one of those dates is better for you, and then we can go ahead and schedule the fourth meeting as well, and then we'll have a fifth meeting too, but we're not going to schedule that yet. So if there's a preference for Tuesday the 12th or Tuesday, January 19th, please chime in. It looks like we have one for the 12th already.
My preference would also be the 12th.
Okay.
Joe, before we leave for the evening, one of the thoughts that I'm walking away with is that we go back to something that was said earlier, and that maybe there needs to be a theme. And if you're going to treat different areas differently, it's all done within the umbrella of the theme. And is there an I heard the aspect of art and landscaping and murals. Is there a way to theme this in some artistic way? You know, again, without calling it an arts district, but to create that flexibility that what is done under some theme. And I'm also walking away with a thought that needs more research. But if you have different ethnic groups moving into this community, or and the community could be just a commercial district, then the theme needs to involve them as well. So you can have different ethnic groups expressing themselves and bringing in more people who like sharing time and space with that particular ethnic group, and you can grow, a specific themed restaurant, but everything is done within this arts district where maybe the art is the country of this ethnic group or the continent of this ethnic group.
Kind of expound on what Sandy has kind of said there. I guess the thing, and it's sort of kind of been themed for Essex and Middle River, would be sort of that gateway to the Chesapeake is sort of what we've hung our hat on for years, is that sort of we are the side of town that's close to the water. We're the side of town that, used to be a very hot vacation destination back in the 20s for people to go and have recreation and enjoy themselves. And even now, we sort of look at ourselves as Eastern Baltimore County's playground. And I think if we're looking to sort of look for a unifying message, there's an opportunity that exists there to play off of that gateway to the Chesapeake, because it then ties in the Chamber of Commerce and their name and sort of their theme that they have. It ties in the theme of the Marine Trades Association. It ties in a lot of the other themes that have existed over the years and exist now. When I look at the signage that was recently put up by the task force, they had got the grant money and stuff for it. Most of that has sort of a nautical coastal feel to it. And I wonder if that wouldn't necessarily be the direction to sort of gear things toward, is to sort of pay homage to that gateway to the Chesapeake that we're sort of known for.
Hey, Sandy, for me, I think people would appreciate something. They're less concerned about a theme and more about something that ties just everything together. Just making things walkable, connected, because right now everything feels discontiguous and transient. And whether you get, food at Woody's or 5-Star or La Velita, right now it just feels like a place on a street. Essex doesn't really feel like a destination. And even the strip of Latino businesses that are there, it feels just like any other empty segment of Eastern Avenue. So for me, I just think most people are less concerned about a theme or even an artistic style, and more just something about an overall, something that ties the area together.
Well, and again, I think tying it together is the critical motivation here. And I'm sure there's multiple ways of doing that. So I'm glad we're all sort of revolving around the same thing of tying it together, whether it's landscaping or whatever.
Okay, thank you everyone for joining us tonight. I think we got a ton of great input here. You'll see on this page that we now have a website that's up with information on this initiative, and there's also a survey. If you could fill out the survey and spread the survey around, that would be great. It's really short. I think it's 8 questions. We'll likely also be doing another survey. I will be sending out this information in a separate email to you all, so you can then send it to whoever you'd like in the community. And then likely in January, we'll send out another survey. So thank you all. We will be meeting next on January 12th at 6 p.m. And let's see. I have one message.
Joe, one quick question on the survey.
Yes.
Is that just generally for the community? Is that more intended for business owners?
It's the community, it's business owners, it's whoever in Essex can click on the survey and fill it out. So it's
cool.
The more the merrier.
Thank you.
Yep, thanks, Gabby. Anything else?
I'm sorry, when is the survey going to be sent out?
So the survey is already up. I will send out a link to the survey tomorrow, so you can all have it. And then share it widely, hopefully.
Sounds good. Thanks.
Okay. Okay. Thanks everyone, and enjoy the weather tomorrow.
Thanks, Joe.
Okay.
Thanks, Joe. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night. Thank you.
A participant has left the meeting.